The signal was not just a cry for help. It was a response to observation. Because something inside the Helix veil had noticed humanity. Noticing it, and the moment humanity focused on it, the signal changed. A second layer appeared inside it. Not words. This time, a patterned response. As if something was testing. Are you finally awake? The transmission didn't arrive like a warning. It didn't tear through space with urgency or trigger alarms across human systems. It slipped in quietly, like something that wasn't meant to be noticed. Something fragile, forcing its way through layers of interference and time itself. At first, it was just noise. A broken signal buried beneath background static. But then it repeated. And when it repeated, people started listening. We surrender. Please. Mercy. The words were distorted, stretched thin as if dragged across light years of suffering, but they were unmistakable. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the signal went silent. Across human space stations flagged it, analysts marked it for review, and most dismissed it as a corrupted transmission from some distant skirmish already long finished. Most people moved on. War, after all, was not uncommon. But above the ash-colored world of Koth Vale, Commander Elias Rook did not move on. He stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship Resolute, staring at the replay as if the words themselves were trying to reach into him. "Play it again," he said, his voice low, controlled, but carrying something beneath it that made the bridge crew hesitate before obeying. The transmission echoed once more through the command deck, weaker this time, the voice trembling at the edge of collapse. "Please." Marusi Rook didn't blink. Around him, officers exchanged glances. This was supposed to be the end. The Varelian Dominion fleet, once a looming threat across entire sectors, now floated crippled and silent beyond visual range. Their weapons were cold, their formations broken. Every indicator pointed to total surrender. Protocol was clear. Humanity accepted surrender. Humanity ended wars. That was what separated them from the species that had once nearly erased them. But the fleet outside didn't power down. Instead, its weapons began to charge. The faint hum of energy building spread through every ship like a heartbeat, growing louder, heavier, inevitable. "Commander," one of the officers said carefully, "that's a formal surrender signal." Rook's gaze remained fixed ahead. "I heard it," he replied. There was no anger in his tone. That was what made it worse. Anger could be reasoned. With this was something colder, something settled. A flicker of memory crossed his mind, uninvited but impossible to stop. A small hand gripping his finger. A voice asking questions about stars, about ships, about the universe beyond, their colony's sky. His daughter had always been curious, always looking upward. The Dominion had looked down instead. First contact hadn't been war. Not at first. It had been observation, study. The Varelians had found humanity biologically fascinating, inefficient, fragile, unpredictable, but interesting. So they took samples. Entire colonies, classified as isolated populations, were quietly erased from galactic maps. Not destroyed in explosions or battles, but harvested, studied, tested. Humanity didn't understand what had happened until the data fragments began to surface. By then, it was too late for millions. Too late for Koth Vale. Too late for his daughter. "Commander Rook, you are ordered to stand down." The voice of Admiral Sana Iqbal cut sharply across the comm channel, steady, authoritative. "The Dominion has surrendered. Re-accept. That is who we are." Rook finally moved, just slightly, as if the weight of the moment had shifted inside him. "That's who we were," he said quietly. The bridge fell silent. Outside, the stars remained unchanged, indifferent to the decision forming within him. "Their fleet is finished," Iqbal continued. "There is no strategic advantage in continuing hostilities." One of the intelligence officers stepped forward, hesitant, but unable to stay silent any longer. "Sir, we've intercepted internal Dominion communications." Rook's eyes shifted, just enough to acknowledge him. "They're moving assets," the officer said. "Hidden fleets. Deep space reserves. They're repositioning while broadcasting surrender." The words hung in the air. Not surprising. Not really. Just confirmation. Rook closed his eyes for a brief moment, exhaling slowly. Mercy, to the Dominion, was not an act of morality. Was a tactic, a delay, a calculation. "Commander," another voice interrupted, softer this time. "Incoming direct transmission. Priority override." Rook frowned. "Source, Dominion Command." That got his attention. Put in. Through. The hologram flickered to life. Unstable at first, then sharpening into the image of a Varelian figure. Its elongated form trembled slightly, bioluminescent patterns along its skin dim and uneven. Fear, by their standards. A request. Direct communication with Commander Elias Rook. The bridge went still again. How do they know your name? Someone whispered under their breath. Rook didn't answer. He already knew. The alien continued, its voice faltering. I was present. During the Karth Vale studies. The words hit harder than any weapon ever could. Rook didn't move, didn't react. But every person on that bridge felt the shift. I oversaw juvenile resilience testing. The alien hesitated, as if even now it struggled to understand the weight of what it was saying. Your offspring was among the subjects. Silence. Complete. Absolute. No alarms. No movement. Just the quiet vacuum of space, and something inside it breaking. I did not understand. Then, the alien said, I do now. Its voice trembled. Softer now. Almost fragile. Please. Mercy. Rook stepped forward. Slowly. Deliberately. Every movement precise. Controlled. Target lock, he said. The tactical officer froze. So, the Dominion fleet, not the fleet. Rook interrupted. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Karth Vale. The officer's breath caught. Sir, that's a civilian research world. Now, no, Rook said quietly. It's evidence. Admiral Iqbal's voice returned, sharper now, urgent. Commander Rook, that is a direct violation of command authority. Stand down, immediately. Rook didn't respond. He placed his hand on the console, fingers hovering for just a second longer than necessary. In that reflection, staring back at him, was not a commander, not a soldier, just a man who had once been asked if stars felt cold, and who never got the chance to answer. He pressed the command. Fire. The fleet responded instantly. Light erupted across the void as coordinated volleys surged forward, cutting through space with terrifying precision. Karth Vale didn't explode. It came apart. Layer by layer, structure by structure. Every installation, every hidden facility, buried beneath its surface was erased. Clean. Final. Inevitable. Seconds later, data flooded in. Confirmed, the intelligence officer said, voice shaking. Hidden shipyards. Weapons manufacturing. Fleet construction. They were rebuilding. Rook said nothing. He didn't need to. Behind the shattered remnants of the Dominion's last deception, their fleet remained silent, powerless, but now afraid, because they understood something too late. Humanity did believe in mercy, but not blindly, not endlessly, and not for those who had turned it into a weapon. In the silence that followed, as the Terran fleet drifted among the fading light of what Karth Vale had once been, a message spread quietly across the stars, not spoken, not broadcast, but understood. Humanity would forgive, but it would never be fooled twice. The frontier had a reputation for being boring, and Admiral Kael Draven preferred it that way. Boring meant predictable. Predictable meant safe. Safe meant fewer names etched into memorial walls back on Earth. For 31 years, he had served in the United Earth Navy, and in all that time he had learned one truth, that no academy bothered to teach nothing, but starts, quietly, stays that way forever. Trouble never announces itself with explosions. It begins with something small, something wrong, something that does not fit. And right now, on the command deck of the UES Resolute, something did not fit. The signal had first appeared as a flicker in the background noise, so faint that the automated filters nearly erased it. Lieutenant Sonaric Ball had caught it by accident, while recalibrating the long-range camera rays. At first she thought it was interference, a stray echo bouncing between dead relay satellites drifting beyond mapped space. But interference did not repeat with perfect rhythm. Interference did not evolve. This signal did. Play it again, Draven said, his voice calm, but his eyes fixed on the waveform hovering in the air above the central console. Sana hesitated, for half a second before complying. The sound filled the bridge, low and layered. Something between a distant cry and a whisper carried through water. It rose, fell, then repeated, but not exactly. Each cycle shifted slightly, as if whatever was producing it was trying to adjust, to refine, to be understood. The officers on the bridge exchanged glances. They tried to hide. Humans were good at pretending. Things did not unsettle them. It was one of their more useful traits. It's structured, Sana said quietly. There's mathematical consistency in the intervals. This isn't random. It's deliberate. Draven leaned back slightly in his command chair, folding his arms as he studied the data. Origin. She swallowed. That's the problem, sir. With a flick of her fingers, she expanded the star map. A section of space lit up in a deep, warning red, the Helix Veil. Even among frontier officers, the name carried weight. Officially it was classified as a null region. No habitable worlds. No strategic value. No traffic permitted under any circumstances. The kind of place governments erased from conversations because acknowledging it raised too many questions. The signal is coming from inside the veil, Sana said. The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop a few degrees. Draven stared at the red zone for a long moment. He had flown past its boundary more times than he could count. Every time, the same orders echoed in his mind. Do not enter. Do not scan. Do not engage. Just empty space, they said. Nothing to see. But empty space did not call out across the void with something that sounded disturbingly like desperation. Run it through all known language matrices, he ordered. Already did. Nothing matches. Not human. Not allied. Not archived alien dialects. It's new. Draven's jaw tightened slightly. New was rarely good. New meant unknown variables. Unknown variables got people killed. He tapped a command into his console, opening a secure channel to Earth Command. The transmission carried the signal data, the coordinates, and a concise report. Stripped of speculation, he waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. The signal continued to play softly in the background, looping again and again, each repetition digging deeper under the skin. It was not loud. It did not need to be. There was something about it that bypassed logic entirely and went straight to instinct. Finally, the reply came. Short, cold, final. Ignore the signal. The Helix Veil is restricted under Interstellar Treaty. This is not a matter of human concern. Do not approach the bridge. Remain silent as the message faded. No one spoke. No one needed to. Draven read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might change if he stared long enough. They did not. He leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose. Sir? Sana asked carefully. Orders? Draven looked at the star map again, at the red zone pulsing like a warning heartbeat. Then he looked at the waveform of the signal. Still repeating. Still reaching. He had spent decades following orders. He had buried friends who followed orders. He had also buried friends who questioned them. There was no clean path in command. Only choices you could live with and ones you could not. Tell me something, Lieutenant, he said quietly. Does that sound like nothing to you? Sana didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. The answer was written all over her face. No, sir, she said finally. It doesn't. Draven nodded once. Decision settling into place like a lock clicking shut. Prep the Wraith for recon, he said. Stealth configuration. Minimal crew. Volunteers only. A ripple moved across the bridge. Not panic. Not fear. Something sharper. Purpose. Sir, one of the tactical officers said cautiously. Earth Command explicitly. I heard what Earth Command said. Draven cut in, his tone still calm, but carrying an edge that ended the discussion instantly. He stood, hands clasped behind his back, as he faced the viewport. Beyond it, the stars stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to choices that would never be undone. I also heard that signal. He turned slightly, enough that his profile caught the dim light of the consoles. And I don't believe in ignoring calls for help. No one argued after that. They didn't agree, not entirely, but they understood. Within the hour, the Corvette Wraithlight slipped away from the Resolute. Its hull darkened to absorb sensor pings, its engines tuned to a whisper. 12 volunteers manned her to few for comfort, too many to pretend it wasn't dangerous. Draven watched its departure in silence, committing the moment to memory in case it became one he regretted. The Helix Veil waited ahead, a region of space that official records insisted was empty. But as the signal echoed once more through the command deck, Draven found himself thinking the same thing. Every instinct in his body was screaming. Empty things did not beg to be heard, and whatever was waiting inside the veil had been calling for a very, very long time. The Wraithlight crossed into the Helix Veil without ceremony, and that was the first thing that felt wrong. There was no sudden turbulence, no violent distortion of space, no dramatic shift in sensors, just a quiet transition, like stepping from one empty room into another. But the silence was different here. It wasn't natural. It pressed in, thick and suffocating, as if the void itself was holding its breath. Sergeant Elias Rook noticed it first. "Anyone else feel that?" he muttered, adjusting his grip on the console behind the pilot's seat. No one answered immediately, but the slight tension in every movement said enough. Lieutenant Sana Iqbal sat at the com station, her eyes locked on the signal feed. "It's stronger now," she said. "Much stronger." The waveform had changed. It was no longer faint or distorted by distance. It was clear to clear. The layered sound filled the small bridge, no longer a whisper but something closer to a voice trying desperately to form words it did not know how to speak. Each repetition carried urgency, a rising edge that made the crew's pulse quicken. Without understanding why, "Lock origin," the pilot said. "Already done," Sana replied, pulling up the display. The star map resolved into a single system at the center of the veil. One star. For planets, a signal was coming from the fourth. "Designated?" Rook asked. Sana hesitated. "There is no designation. It's not in any registry. That alone should have been impossible. Every system within mapped space, even restricted ones, carried some form of identification. A blank entry meant one of two things. Either it had been deliberately erased, or it had never been recorded at all. Neither option was comforting. "Approach vector set," the pilot said. "Will be in orbit in 12 minutes. Draven's voice came through the com, steady but edged with something unreadable. "Wraithlight, this is Resolute. Status." Sana responded immediately. "We've entered the veil. No resistance so far. Signal strength increasing. Origin confirmed fourth. Planet in central system." A brief pause followed. "Understood," Draven said. "Proceed with caution. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you pull back. That's an order." Sana glanced at the others before replying. "Yes, sir." The channel closed, leaving them alone again with the sound. As the wraithlight slipped deeper into the system, the star ahead grew brighter, its light oddly muted, as if filtered through something unseen. The planets came into view one by one: barren rock, frozen wasteland, gas giant, until the fourth filled the viewport. And then no one spoke. Because the planet was not dead. It should have been. The surface readings showed minimal atmosphere, unstable climate patterns, and radiation levels that fluctuated unpredictably. By every known standard, it was uninhabitable. And yet, there were structures. Massive ones. Grid-like patterns stretching across continents. Too precise to be natural. Energy signatures flickered across the surface in repeating intervals. Faint, but unmistakably artificial. "That's not possible," Rook whispered. Sana didn't respond. She was staring at the signal data, her breathing shallow. "It's coming from down there," she said. "Not one source. Multiple. Thousands. No, millions." The realization hit the crew all at once. This wasn't a beacon. It wasn't a single transmitter calling into the void. It was a chorus. "We need a closer scan," the pilot said, taking us into low orbit. "Wait," Rook snapped. "We don't know what's down there." "That's why we came," Sana said quietly. The ship descended, slipping through the thin upper atmosphere with barely a ripple. Clouds, if they could be called, that hung in pale, lifeless streaks across the sky. The closer they got, the clearer the structures became. They weren't cities. They were enclosures. Vast, geometric barriers, forming enormous sections across the planet's surface, each one glowing faintly with energy. Inside those barriers, there was movement. "Zoom," Rook said. Sana obeyed. The image sharpened, and the bridge went completely silent. They were alive. The beings inside the barriers were small, thin, their bodies almost translucent. Even from orbit, it was clear something was wrong. They moved slowly, unevenly, gathering in clusters near the edges of the barriers, as if drawn by something beyond them. "They're responding to us," Sana whispered. "They can see the ship." Rook leaned closer to the display, his expression hardening. "That's not a settlement," he said. "That's a prison." The word hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Automated structures surrounded each barrier, towering constructs that floated just above the surface, rotating slowly, scanning constantly. Weapon systems. No question. "We're picking up defensive arrays," the pilot said. "Ancient, but still active." "Who built this?" one of the crew murmured. No one had an answer. Sana's hands moved quickly across her console. "I'm isolating the signal pattern. Translating structure." I think she froze. "You think?" "What?" Rook pressed. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I think it's not just a signal." The sound filled the bridge again, clearer now than ever before. And suddenly, horribly, it made sense. Not as language, not as words, but as meaning. It wasn't random. It wasn't abstract. It was emotion encoded into pattern, desperation, loneliness, pain. They're not transmitting data, Sana said, her voice shaking. They're transmitting feeling. The realization hit like a physical blow. Every repetition of the signal wasn't just a call, it was a memory. A shared experience broadcast into the void, over and over again, for anyone who might be capable of receiving it. How long? Rook asked quietly. Sana checked the signal decay patterns, her face draining of color. Based on the degradation rate, thousands of years. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of that number settled over them, crushing in its implication. Thousands of years of calling out into a silent galaxy. Thousands of years of no one answering. The pilot broke the silence. We need to report this now. Sana nodded, already opening the channel. But before she could transmit, every alarm on the Wraith light lit up at once. Contact! The pilot shouted. Multiple signatures. The orbital defense platforms that had seemed dormant seconds ago flared to life, their surfaces igniting with energy. Targeting locks snapped onto the corvette in rapid succession. They're engaging, Rook barked. Evasive maneuvers. The Wraithlight lurched hard to the side as the first volley of energy fire tore through the space it had occupied moments before. The ship's stealth systems strained under the sudden attention, struggling to compensate. They're not programmed to keep things out, Sana said, gripping her console. They're programmed to keep things in. Another blast rocked the ship. Alarms screaming now. Hull integrity dropping. The pilot warned. We can't stay here. Rook turned to Sana. Did you get enough? She looked at the screen, at the beings below, still gathered at the barriers, still reaching upward despite the chaos above them, despite the weapons firing, despite everything. Yeah, she said, her voice breaking. We got enough. The Wraithlight burned hard for orbit, engines screaming as it pushed past safe limits. Another blast struck the hull, tearing across its surface, but the ship held together just long enough to break free of the planet's gravity well. As the system fell away behind them, the signal remained, still repeating, still calling, still waiting. And now, for the first time in thousands of years, it had been heard. The Wraithlight did not glide back into formation with the Resolute. It staggered. Its hull was scorched black along the port side, one of its engine arrays flickering unevenly, and its stealth plating had been partially stripped away by the orbital defenses. It looked less like a warship, and more like something that had survived, by sheer refusal to die. Admiral Kael Draven stood on the command deck, hands clasped behind his back, watching its approach in silence. He had seen damaged ships before. He had commanded them. But this felt different. Because whatever had done that to the Wraithlight wasn't just defending territory. It was guarding a secret. The docking clamps locked with a heavy metallic echo, and within minutes, the recon team was on the bridge. They didn't look like soldiers returning from a mission. They looked like people who had seen something they could not unsee. Lieutenant Sana Iqbal's hands were still shaking as she set her data slate onto the central console. Sergeant Elias Rook stood beside her, jaw tight, eyes distant. Draven didn't ask for a formal report. He simply nodded once. Show me. Sana activated the projection. The bridge dimmed as the recorded footage filled the space above them. The planet appeared first gray, lifeless. Wrong. Then the structures came into view. The barriers. The enclosures. The scale of them made several officers inhale sharply. Pause, Draven said quietly. The image froze on a section of the surface where thousands of the imprisoned beings had gathered near the glowing barrier wall. Even in stillness, their condition was unmistakable. They're alive, someone whispered. Barely, Rook replied. Sana resumed the playback. The footage zoomed closer, capturing the thin, translucent forms of the prisoners, their movements, slow, fragile. And then the moment came, the part that none of them were ready for. The beings looked up, not randomly, not aimlessly, directly at the Wraithlight, and they reached out. Hands pressed against the barrier. Bodies leaning forward as far as they could without collapsing. No aggression, no fear, just hope. Raw, desperate, almost painful to witness. The bridge fell completely silent. Draven felt something tighten in his chest, something he had learned long ago to ignore in order to function as a commander. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was something worse. There's more, Sana said, her voice unsteady. She switched the feed. The waveform appeared again, but this time, accompanied by her analysis. It's not just a signal, she continued. It's emotional encoding. They're broadcasting. Their experience is pain, isolation, memory directly into the transmission pattern. For how long? Draven asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be something he wanted to hear. Sana hesitated, then forced the words out. Approximately 4,000 years. The number landed like a physical weight. For 1,000 years. Longer than most civilizations lasted. Longer than entire species had existed. Rook stepped forward, his voice rough. They've been calling for help longer than we've had recorded history. No one argued, because there was nothing to argue. Draven turned his gaze back to the frozen image of the barrier. Who did this? He asked quietly. That question. You had an answer, and they all knew it. The energy signatures, Sana said carefully. The construction patterns. The control systems on the orbital defenses. They match conquered technology. The word settled over the room like a storm. Clout. The Galactic conquered the same alliance that governed thousands of species, that dictated law across the stars, that had dismissed humanity as insignificant. You're saying this is sanctioned? One officer asked, disbelief creeping into his tone. Sana didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. Draven exhaled slowly, the sound controlled but heavy. Send everything to Earth Command, he said. Full data package. No filters. Sana nodded and began transmitting. The seconds stretched, then minutes. The bridge remained quiet, except for the soft hum of systems and the faint echo of the signals still looping in the background. Finally, the reply came through. Draven opened it. His eyes moved across the text once. Then again. His expression didn't change, but something behind it hardened. What did they say? Rook asked. Draven didn't answer immediately. He turned the display outward so the senior officers could read it for themselves. The message was brief, efficient, clinical. All data regarding the Helix Veil is classified under conquered authority. Human forces are to withdraw immediately. Further investigation is prohibited. This matter is not a human concern. The same words, the same dismissal, but now they carried a different weight. Because now they knew what not a human concern actually meant. It meant billions of living beings imprisoned for millennia. It meant suffering so prolonged it had become part of the fabric of space itself. It meant a deliberate decision to ignore it. Rook let out a short, humorless breath. They knew, he said. They've always known. No one contradicted him. Because there was no other explanation left. Draven closed the message with a single motion. He walked toward the viewport, staring out at the distant stars. For a long moment, he said nothing. The crew waited. They had served under him long enough to recognize the silence, not hesitation. Not uncertainty, but calculation. Not of odds, of consequences. Sir Sana said quietly, those people down there. They're still transmitting. As if to emphasize her words, the signal pulsed again through the bridge. No longer abstract. No longer distant. Now it felt personal. Draven's reflection stared back at him from the viewport glass. Older than he remembered, carrying the weight of every decision that had ever cost lives. He had followed orders, his entire career, trusted the system, believed that the larger structure, flawed as it was, still aimed towards stability, to balance towards something resembling justice. But this wasn't balance. This was silence, enforced over suffering. He turned back to his crew. Prepare a full-spectrum broadcast, he said, unencrypted. Every human channel. Civilian, military, colonial, everything. Sana blinked. Sir, if we do that, the Conquered will intercept it. Draven finished for her. His voice was steady now. Certain. Good. The word landed with quiet finality. Let him. The crew moved instantly. Hesitation burned away by something sharper. Purpose. Rook stepped closer, lowering his voice. Admiral, this isn't just breaking protocol. This is I know exactly what it is, Draven said, meeting his gaze. There was no anger in his expression. No doubt. Just a calm resolve that was somehow more intense than either. We've just been told to ignore 4,000 years of suffering. He glanced once more at the frozen image of the beings behind the barrier. I'm not going to be the man who does that. The transmission array powered up, energy building as it prepared to send the data across human space. Every image, every reading, every second of what they had found. No edits. No omissions. Truth, raw and undeniable. Draven watched the system reach full charge. Then he gave the order. Send it. And in that moment, without raising his voice, without firing a single shot, he started something the galaxy would not be able to stop. The broadcast did not explode. Across human space it spread like a shockwave, moving faster than thought. Every relay station, every civilian network, every military channel lit up at once, as Admiral Kael Draven's transmission forced its way through systems designed to filter, delay, and control information. There was no time to stop it, no time to bury it, no time to soften what it showed. On Earth, in cities that never slept, and towns that barely appeared on maps, screens flickered and shifted without warning. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Traffic slowed as drivers stared at dashboards. In offices, classrooms, factories, and homes, billions of people saw the same thing at the same time. The gray world of the Helix Veil, the endless barriers stretching across its surface. The thin figures gathered behind glowing walls. And then the moment that changed everything, the prisoners looking up, reaching out, hope breaking through exhaustion that should have crushed it long ago. There was no narration, no commentary. It did not need any. The truth carried itself. In orbit above distant colonies, workers paused in zero-gravity docks, tools drifting forgotten from their hands as the signal played across shared terminals. On mining stations carved into asteroids, hardened crews who had spent decades facing vacuum in isolation stood motionless, watching something far worse than anything space could do. Even aboard military vessels, where discipline was ingrained and emotion carefully controlled, officers and enlisted alike stared at their screens in silence. They understood what they were seeing, not just the suffering, but the time. 4,000 years. The number spread as quickly as the images themselves, whispered first, then spoken aloud, then repeated with a growing edge that turned disbelief into something sharper. Humanity had a long memory when it came to injustice. It had been written into their history again and again, in different forms, across different ages. And every time, the same question echoed: how had no one stopped it sooner? Now, for the first time, that question had a different answer, because now they knew, and knowing changed everything. In the halls of government, emergency sessions were called before the broadcast had even finished. Leaders who rarely agreed on anything found themselves sitting in stunned silence, watching the same footage loop again and again. Advisors spoke in urgent tones, calculating political risk, economic fallout, diplomatic consequences. But beneath all of it, something deeper was taking hold, something that could not be measured in numbers or controlled by policy. Anger, not loud, not chaotic, controlled, focused, the kind that built slowly and, once formed, did not fade. On the frontier, aboard the resolute Draven stood on the bridge and watched the confirmation signals roll in. The broadcast had reached Earth. It had reached the colonies. It had reached every human system that could receive a signal. There was no taking it back now. Conquered channels are reacting, Sana reported, her voice steady despite the tension. In the room, multiple intercept attempts. They're trying to shut it down, but it's already propagated beyond containment. Draven nodded once. He had expected nothing less. The Galactic Concord did not tolerate disruption, especially not something that threatened the image of order they had maintained for millennia. And this was more than disruption. This was exposure. Incoming transmission, Rook said. High priority. Concord diplomatic channel. The bridge went still. Draven didn't need to hear it to know what it would say. Put it through, he ordered. The image that appeared was cold, composed, controlled, an emissary of a system that had never been questioned on this scale before. Human command, the figure began, its voice precise and measured. You have violated restricted protocols and disseminated classified information. You are ordered to cease all further transmissions and withdraw immediately from the Helix Veil. This situation does not concern your species. The words echoed across the bridge, identical in meaning to the message Earth Command had received earlier, but now they sounded different, hollow, because now everyone knew what they were trying to hide. Draven stepped forward slightly, his gaze fixed on the projection. It concerns us now, he said simply. There was no anger in his voice, no raised tone, just certainty, the kind that didn't need to prove itself. The emissary paused, as if recalibrating. You do not understand the scale of what you are interfering with, it replied. Then explain it, Draven said. The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what they already knew. There would be no explanation, no justification, only orders to look away. The transmission cut abruptly. Rook let out a slow breath. They're not even trying to deny it. They don't think they have to, Sana said quietly. Draven turned back to the viewport. The Stars beyond it unchanged, indifferent to what was unfolding. But something had shifted. Not out there. Here, within the people who had just seen what the galaxy had ignored for 4,000 years. The signal from the veil still played softly, in the background, looping endlessly, no longer unheard, no longer unanswered. Draven watched the data streams continue to update, watched as more and more systems acknowledged the broadcast, watched as humanity divided, argumentative, unpredictable humanity began to align around a single undeniable truth. This was no longer a hidden problem. It was a line, and it had just been crossed. The response from humanity was not immediate, and that was what made it dangerous. There was no single voice rising above the rest. No instant declaration of action, no unified command broadcast within minutes of the Helix Veil revelation. Instead, there was silence, but it was not the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of something forming across Earth. The footage replayed on every network, looping endlessly as analysts, historians, and ordinary citizens, not after what had been felt. The signal from the Helix Veil continued to play in the background, softer now, almost blending into the ship's systems. But once you noticed it, you couldn't ignore it. It lingered, like a memory that refused. "Tiff, do you think they'll back down?" Sana asked. Draven considered the question, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to be certain before he said it out loud. "No," he said finally. "Systems like that don't back down. They double down." He turned to face her fully now, his expression calm but firm. "And we're about to find out if we do the same." Across human space, the emergency session continued. Voices rose, clashed, argued. Strategies were proposed and dismantled. Risks were calculated and recalculated. But beneath all of it, one thing remained constant: the images from the veil, playing again and again, impossible to forget. Humanity had spent centuries expanding into the stars, learning its place among older, more powerful species. It had adapted, it had compromised, it had accepted limits. But there were some lines that, once seen, could not be unseen. And once a line like that was crossed, the question was no longer whether to act. The question was how far they were willing to go. The emergency session did not look like unity at first. It looked like chaos. Representatives from Earth's nations filled the circular chamber, voices overlapping, arguments cutting across one another with a familiar intensity that had defined human politics for centuries. On the surrounding screens, colonial delegates joined from across the star, some calm, some furious, some visibly shaken. The footage from the Helix Veil played on a loop behind them all, a constant reminder of what had forced this gathering into existence. Every few minutes, the image would return to the same moment, the prisoners reaching out, thin hands pressed against an invisible wall, eyes fixed on something beyond their world. It didn't matter how many times they saw it. It didn't lose its impact. If anything, it grew heavier. "We cannot rush into a confrontation with the conquered," one representative argued, his voice sharp with urgency. "They outnumber us, outgun us, and control the majority of established trade routes. A direct conflict would be catastrophic. So we do nothing?" Another shot back immediately. "We pretend we didn't see it. We let them continue." "I didn't say that," the first replied, frustration rising. "I said we need a measured response. Diplomatic channels exist. For a reason. Diplomatic channels." A third voice cut in, bitter and incredulous. "They've had 4,000 years of diplomatic channels." The chamber erupted again, voices rising, colliding, fracturing into smaller arguments that spiraled outward. Funding, strategy, authority, jurisdiction. The same divisions that had always existed were still there, sharp as ever. Humanity had never been good at agreeing quickly. But beneath the noise, something else was happening, something quieter, but far more important. No one was arguing about whether the Thoran should be freed. That part had already been decided, unspoken but absolute. The argument was only about how, on the far side of the chamber, a colonial delegate leaned forward, her expression tight, with controlled emotion. "We're talking about scale like it's the only thing that matters," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. "Yes, they conquered us stronger. Yes, they have more ships. That hasn't changed. What has changed is that now we know what they're doing with that power." The room quieted, just slightly. Enough for her words to land. "They didn't just make a decision 4,000 years ago," she continued. "They maintained it. Every year, every generation, they chose to keep those people imprisoned. And when we found out, they told us to look away." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the chamber. If we accept that, then we're not just bystanders. We're participants. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument, because that was the part no one could dismiss. On one of the upper screens, a military advisor spoke next, his tone measured but firm. We've analyzed the Concorde's likely response patterns. Based on historical precedent, they will escalate if challenged. They will not negotiate from a position they perceive as superior. They will expect compliance. And if they don't get it, someone asked. The advisor didn't hesitate. They will enforce it. The implication hung in the air. War? Not declared. Not formal, but inevitable if humanity refused to back down. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of that possibility settled over the chamber, pressing against every person present. Humanity had fought wars before against itself, against external threats, but this would be different. This would be against a system that had governed the galaxy for millennia, a system that believed it could not be challenged. Then, quietly, one of the oldest representatives in the chamber stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We keep talking about cost, he said, his tone steady, almost reflective. Lives, resources, stability, all important, all real. He glanced at the screen behind him, at the frozen image of the Helix Veil. But there's another cost we're not talking about. The room stilled. The cost of doing nothing. He let the words sit for a moment before continuing. We've seen this before. Not this exact situation, not on this scale, but the pattern. People suffering while others with the power to act decide it's too complicated, too dangerous, too inconvenient. His gaze moved slowly across the chamber, meeting eyes one by one. Every time in our history that we've made that choice, we've regretted it. Every time we've said, not our problem, it's become one. No one interrupted him. We teach our children about those moments, he said. We tell them we would have acted differently, that we would have been better. He gestured toward the screen. Well, this is that moment. The silence that followed wasn't uncertain anymore. It was focused. The arguments didn't disappear, but they changed. Less about whether to act, more about how to make it possible. Military projections were refined. Supply chains recalculated. Civilian industries assessed for conversion. The conversation shifted from hesitation to preparation. Hours passed, then more. Outside the chamber, billions watched, waiting. On Earth, on colonies, on ships drifting between stars, people followed every word, every exchange, every shift in tone, because they understood something fundamental. Whatever decision came out of that room would define what humanity stood for in the galaxy. Finally, the call for a vote was made. It wasn't dramatic. No grand speech. No final argument. Just a simple procedural step that carried the weight of everything that had come before it. One by one, the votes were cast. Earth representatives first, then the colonies, then the independent systems. The results appeared in real time, each confirmation adding to a pattern that became clear long before it was complete. When the final count locked in, the chamber remained silent for a single, suspended moment. Unanimous. Not a single dissenting vote. The resolution was displayed in plain text, unembellished, direct. Humanity will not withdraw from the Helix Veil. Humanity will act to free the imprisoned population. Any force used to prevent this action will be met with force. This decision is final. There was no applause, no celebration. Just a quiet understanding of what had just been set in motion. Across human space, the reaction was immediate, not chaotic, not panicked, but focused. Orders began to move. Systems shifted. Industries recalibrated. The decision had been made, and now it had to be carried out. On the Resolute, Admiral Keldraven watched the confirmation come through. He read it once, then closed the display. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he turned to his crew. You heard it, he said simply. There was no need to explain further. They already understood. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It wasn't even just a military operation. It was a line drawn in full view of the galaxy. And now, there was no stepping back from it.